Hello and welcome to another episode of creating an underwater survival game like Subnautica. This is part 9 where we will be creating a scanner and a scan info menu. So first I'm going to start by going to scripts, inventory, ItemScriptableObject, and we need to add a couple of things to the ItemScriptableObject. So our plan for the scanner is to have a tool that scans an item. It'll check for item scriptable objects that are scannable. Then they'll slowly increase the scan percentage of that item scriptable object until 100%. And then when it is finished scanning, it's going to add it to a menu. And in that menu, you can check out the item scriptable object description and name. Yeah, so for now, let's add those extra variables that we need to ItemScriptableObject. So first we need a description. I'm going to do a neat trick here. So here we'll just do a text area. So in the editor, you'll actually have a bigger text box than usual. So you can set the area of that text box to whatever you like. After that, I'm going to add the variables we need for scanning. So I'm going to add a bool scannable that tells you whether an item is able to be scanned or not. We'll have a float, which is the scan percentage of the island. This is the value that will be saved, and it will keep track of how much of the item you've scanned. So if you like stop scanning it halfway and then come back, you'll still have the saved scan percentage. And by default, it should be 0. I'm also going to put a variable for the scan rate. So different items can take a different amount of time to scan. Like for example, Leviathan fishes can take much longer to scan than smaller fishes. Sorry, I forgot to put in the scannable bool. Yeah, so here we just want to set all of the fish to be scannable. Maybe we'll have the large fish take 30 to scan. So the scan rate is basically how many seconds you want in total to reach 100%. So it'll scan at a speed such that it'll finish the scanning to 100% after 10 seconds. So in this large fish, it'll take 30 full seconds of scanning in order to completely scan it. Then here in flora, we'll have all of the flora be scannable except for red vine cuttings. Yeah, and we'll have them all be 10. The items shouldn't need to be scanned, but the rocks, I'll make them scannable as well. In future, for scanning, we can implement a wreckage system such that when you scan wreckage, it allows you to unlock recipes. So we'll set the item scriptable object of the scannable to the scanned item to have a recipe attached. We'll do that another time. The next thing we need to do before creating the scanner object is to create a menu. So I'm going to zoom out again. So let's go to menus. We want to move the hotbar crossbar to be above the menus. And then we want to create a new UI menu. So I'm going to create an image. And then I'm going to expand it. Then I'm going to get the color from the inventory menu and put it in here. I'm going to name this menu Scan Info Menu. Next thing I'm going to do is to create something to hold the page. So I'm going to create a border. I'm going to call this the page holder. Then I'm going to add a vertical layout component. So under this page holder, I'm going to add a title. And then I'm going to add a scroll view. So the scroll view is what we're going to be using in order to see the page. So here I'm just going to adjust the settings a bit. As you can see, this is our scroll bar. I'm going to make it slightly thicker. Yeah, so now we have these two objects that fit properly. I'm actually going to close it a bit more. So in the scroll view, we're going to go to the content box and we're going to make it longer so that we can fit all of the items in the game. Yeah, and as you can see, as we make the content box longer, we get our scroll bar automatically adjusts. Now under the content, I'm going to create an empty game object. I'm going to call it grid. So we're going to store each item in here on a grid, and the player will be able to look at it to see what items they have unlocked or not. So on this grid, I'm going to make it stretch to fill, and then I'm going to make sure it has a border around it. Then I'm going to add a grid layout component. So I'll have the cell size be 100, same as the items in the inventory, but here we'll have the spacing be 50 by 50. So when we click play, we should be able to scroll the menu. Of course, you'd only know if you were scrolling if there was stuff in the menu. So this is the basis for our menu. Next thing we'll be doing is to create a prefab for buttons. So each button will represent a scanned item, and then when you click on it, it'll display information about that item. So to start us off, I'm going to grab an inventory item prefab, and I'm going to put one in the grid. So if I duplicate it, you can see it fits in the grid properly. So what I'm going to do is to unpack it, and I'm going to rename this scan info button. I'm going to remove the interactable UI object. So here we have an object and an image. This image can probably be centered. So on this button, we want to add an event trigger. And then when pointer down, we'll add a function here in order to display the item later on. For now, we'll leave it be. So in prefabs, I'm just going to drag this and create a new prefab. The last thing we need to do for the menu UI, I'm just going to delete this for now, is to create a info tab. So this tab will open every time you click one of the scan info buttons, and it will just display info about that item in the button. So in scanner info menu, I'm going to create empty. Oh, actually, I'm going to create an image. I'm going to resize it and then center it. Actually, in page holder, I'm going to adjust the height of the scroll view. There we go. So as I was saying here, I'm just going to name this info. And I'll have it be translucent black. So on info, I'm going to add a horizontal layout group. Then I'm going to add an image. I'm going to make it 400 by 400. And then the layout group should start in the middle center. After the image, I'm going to add an empty game object. Resize it to take up half of the page. So I'll have the width be 400. And we won't force child expand, but instead we'll give it a spacing of about 50. So under text, I'll have title or name. Text will also need to be a layout group. Yeah, so I'll have name, and then I'll also have description. This is where that description that we added to the ItemScriptable objects earlier will be displayed. So for description, I'm just going to make sure it takes up the box. Here I'm going to make sure it's middle center again. Here I'll shrink this text box somewhat. And then we'll add one more thing, a button. This button will be used to close this menu. So on this button, on click, we'll just deactivate info. With that, that's the info menu. So I'm going to disable it, and we'll re-enable it whenever we need it. Okay, actually for the scan info button, instead of an event trigger, we'll actually do a regular button. Yeah, and then later on we'll add a function to the on-click. Okay, now that we've created the menu for the scanner info menu, we can just disable it for now and then get back to creating the code for it. So I'm going to create a new script under UI, and I'm going to call it scanned info displayer. So this will be the script that controls the info screen of the scanner info menu, if you recall this screen. So it will be able to activate and deactivate it and make sure that the text is set to the correct text. So if you open up the scan info displayer, we can add Unity and Unity Engine.ui and TextMesh Pro here. So in this class, we'll need a couple of variables. We need to keep track of the picture, the image that we have, the title, the text, as in the description text, and yeah, we're going to create a function that will display the items. Okay, so let's write down all the variables we need. Now we can delete, start, and update. Then we can create a new function, display info. So this function will take in an ItemScriptable object, and then it will set the picture and the text to have the correct picture and text. Then it will set the display info as active. So we can close out this and then go down to info and put scan info display over here. I'm just going to assign the items. And of course, the button will always turn info off, which effectively resets it. I'm also going to create a folder here in UI, and I'm going to call it the scanned info menu. And I'll put all related scripts in here. So now we can actually make the scanned info manager. So I'm going to create a C script, and I'm going to call it scanned info manager. So this script will inherit from the UI base class because it's another UI menu. We will also be using the Unity Engine.ui, TextMesh Pro, and also Link for this one. So first of all, we're going to need to keep track of a list of all of the objects that have been scanned. So every item that we want to display in this menu, we'll have to have it in a list. Then I'm going to keep a reference to the button prefab because we're going to spawn one for every item that we have in this list. Now I'm going to keep a section of variables for the info pop-up. So we're just going to have a reference to the scanned info displayer and then also the transform of the info page. Next up, we'll be keeping a reference to the scanning heads-up display. So this will be a little display, a little piece of UI that shows up whenever you're holding the scanner gun and pointing at something that can be scanned. So we're going to create the references for it now, but we'll implement it later. So the first thing we want to do is to toggle the menu. I'm going to open and close this menu whenever you press I. So I'm going to put an update if input got get key down keycode.I toggle menu. So this will handle opening and closing the menu. Okay, then the next thing we need in this menu is a series of functions that we can use to add items to the menu or so. So the first function is going to be unlock scanned item. So whenever this function is called, it will add an item to the list of scanned objects, and then it will spawn in the button prefab for that specific item. And yeah, basically it adds an item to the list and make sure that it shows up on the info menu. So let's create a function. So whenever we get an item, we want to make sure that its scan percentage is set to 100 so that it doesn't go over or under, so that it doesn't go over 100%. And also we want to make sure the item is no longer scannable because once it's been added to this menu, you shouldn't be able to scan it again. Next up, we're going to add the item to the scan objects list and then reorder it to make sure that it's in the correct order. Yeah, so here we're just using link to make sure that the list gets reordered. Then we want to generate a button for the item. However, we haven't made that code yet, so let's do that one next. So here I'm going to create a new function called generate button. So it will take in an ItemScriptable object. So in this function, what we want to do is to create a button, make sure that it's under the grid game object, if you recall the one that has a grid layout group, so that it will automatically set a transform. Then we want to add a function to the button to make sure that it displays the correct pop-up whenever you click on it. Then lastly, we change the button's image to be the image of the item that it is. Yeah, so let's write that. So what we want to do here is to make sure that we keep a reference to the button that we create, and of course we want the transform to be under info page. And there we have it, we have generate button. Now we just need to put that in our unlock scanned item function. The next function I'm going to create is one called initialize buttons. So whenever you start the game, if you already have some items that have been added to the scan list when you restart, you'd want to initialize them. So you want to initialize anything that you already have in your scan info page, in your scan info menu, even before you unlock anything. So I'm going to create the function. So what this function will do is order the scan objects list. So we reorder them. Then we'll just do a for each loop to generate the buttons for each item. Oh yeah, one more thing. In the generate button, we actually want to make sure that the current button's transform is actually the same as their position in the list. Yeah, so we want to set the buttons to be in the correct place in the scan objects list. So here I'm just going to do current button.transform. I'm going to set sibling index, and then yeah, and here I'm just going to do scan objects dot index of and then the item. So what this line does is make sure that every time we generate a button, it sets it to the correct position so that it's in the same order as the scan objects list. Yeah, so back to initialize buttons, I'm just going to call it in start. This makes sure that whenever we start up the game, any buttons that already are in the list will be initialized. Next up, I'm going to create two functions that will be used to update the scanned UI that we're going to have on screen. So if you recall earlier, I said that we're going to add a UI that displays the scan percentage of an item whenever you hover over it with a scanner. So these two functions are going to help to display that UI. So first one, I'm going to call it update scan displayer. This will take in an item scriptable object, and so it will display the exact percentage of that item scriptable object. So first we're going to check if there is no item or if the item isn't scannable, and then we'll just display the scanner as 0. This is to make sure we don't get an error in case the item isn't there at all. Then here, if there is a selected item and it is scannable, we can display the scan amount of the selected item. The last function we're going to make is one called toggle scan displayer. So this will turn on and off the scan display. And while we display it, we want to actually turn off the crosshair so it doesn't overlap. So this is why we added a crosshair variable in the PC so that we can access it to toggle it for our scan displayer. So the toggle scan displayer will take in a bool. So here, if the bool is true, then we'll turn on the scan displayer and we'll turn off the crosshair. And likewise, if it's not true, then we'll turn off the scan displayer and turn on the crosshair. Now over here, we can just add in toggle scan displayer. This is to make sure that it turns off. If there is no item or if it's not scannable, we don't want to show the scan display. And then if there is an item, we want to show it. So we'll have toggle scan displayer true. Yeah, so that's everything for the scan info menu. So let's put this into the scene and assign all of the variables. So now that we're done with the code, we can now assign the scanner info menu to the menus tab. So if I go to scripts, so I can put the manager here. So the menu would be the scanner info menu. So we have the scan objects list here. Then the button prefab would be in prefabs. So the scan info button prefab goes here. For the info pop-up, we want this info tab. So for the info pop-up, we'll take the info game object. And then for the info page, we actually want to go to the page holder, then the scroll view, the viewport content, and get the grid here. The info page is where we want to spawn in all the buttons, so we want to get the transform position of the grid. Next up, we have the display scan percentage variables. So now I'm going to create the scan percentage variables. So I'm going to close up menus, and under player canvas, I'm going to create a new empty game object. I'll call it scan display, and under I'll set it to 100 by 100 in the center. Right, and then under scan display, I'm going to add an image and a text mesh pro. So this text here, I'm just going to put 0%. We're going to center it. I'm going to set the size to be 38. And here I'm going to set the width and height to be 100 by 100. This image here, we're going to be setting it to that sprite that we uploaded at the beginning of the video. If we call this radial sprite here, as you can see, it's a circle, and here we have the text 0%. Remember if I said earlier that we're going to have a fill amount. So if we change the image type to filled, you can see that we have a fill amount variable here now. So you see if I change this to horizontal, it'll fill from left to right or right to left. There's also vertical. But what I'm going to do is change it to radial 360, and I'm going to start it from the top. So as you can see now, as we increase the fill amount, which is from 0 to 1, we can see that it actually scans by increasing the amount. Yeah, that's our scan display. And we already have the code that will change the text as well as the image fill amount. Yeah, so if I go back to menu, I can add the scan display here, add in the text and the image. And with that, that should be everything for our scan info menu. For now, I'm just going to add a few random objects to the scan thing so I can show you how it works. So maybe I'll put in copper and crystallarium. Yeah, and one more thing, just turn off your scan display. We'll toggle it whenever we need to. So here, if I were to click play, oh, okay, so I can press I, and as you can see, the item information pops up. You can click I again to close it, and you can see it's a scrolling menu. And if I click it, I can see actually the name of the item, and it shows up in this display. We don't see the description because we haven't written a description for anything. But as you can see, the scanner info menu works. One thing actually is that the info page is the title text is a bit small for the info page, so I'm just going to change the size of it. Yeah, with that there shouldn't be any more clipping like just now. Yeah, so that is the scanner info menu, and now we can finally make the scanner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Scripts, Inventory, Tools, and create another script here. I'm going to call it Scanner, and like all tools, we are going to inherit from the tool base class. So it's a little different from other tools, so we're going to need a couple of things. We're going to need a variable of the scan info manager. We're going to need a float, which will be a timer. And then we're going to need to have a variable that stores the current item that's being hovered. So let's write those in. So the first thing we want to do is we want to actually override awake from the tool base class. So here I'm just going to set the scan info manager. Yeah, and that's all we're going to do for awake. So usually in awake we will actually be setting the tool action, but since a scanner is a unique case, we'll actually be overriding the update instead. So we won't be needing the tool action for the scanner. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is to create a function. This function is going to be called scan, so it's going to be called over and over whenever the mouse button is held down. So scan will be what will increase the scan percentage of any item scriptable object, and then it will use the scan info manager to unlock the item once it reaches 100. So in scan, we'll take in an item scriptable object. So whenever we scan, what we want to do first is check if it's reached 100% scanned. So if it's completely scanned, we need to mark it as scanned. Yeah, so if we reach 100% scan or slightly more, we'll unlock the item from the scan info manager. So for the rest of scan, what we're going to do is to have a timer, and so that timer will increase along with the game time. So that timer will increase for every second that is passed in game time. And then whenever that timer hits a certain threshold, we'll add 1 to the scan percentage. So this timer amount is determined by what is the current item you're hovering. If you recall, back in ItemScriptableObject, we added a scan rate for each ItemScriptable object so that different items can be scanned at different rates. We'll be using that scan rate to determine how much time we need to pass before we increase the scan percentage by 1. So how we do this in update is by doing timer plus equals time.delta time. So if you're familiar with using a timer in update, adding time.delta time every frame makes it such that the timer increases in seconds, even if it may be called in many frames per second. What we're going to do next is to add a condition. So if the timer reached the designated time, then we will increase the percentage amount by 1 and then reset the timer. So here I'm going to do if timer is more than or equal to current hover item dot scan rate divided by 100. So the reason is that if timer starts from 0 and it increases by seconds, we want to have a threshold. So the current hover object scan rate is the amount of seconds you want to pass before an item is fully scanned. So for example, something with a scan rate of 10 will take 10 seconds to be completely scanned from 0 to 100. So how much time does it take to scan 1%? In simple math, if the scan rate takes 10 seconds to scan 100%, it will take 10 over 100 to scan 1%. And that's why we're taking scan rate divided by 100 here. So every time we reach that amount of time, then we will increase the percentage by 1. So what we're going to do now is to increase the scan percentage by 1. Yeah, so we're going to increase scan percentage by 1 and then reset the timer. So when we reset the timer, then it will increase slowly until it reaches this time. and then it'll increase the percentage by 1 again. So the concept's really simple. Now to actually implement the scan function, we need to turn back to update and actually override the update from tool base class. So usually in tool base class, whenever you get mouse button down, then it activates tool action one time. But for scanner, we need to check if the mouse button is being held down instead of like only one time. So it will run scan every frame. We're going to write the code here. So similarly to the tool-based class, we're checking if the current item is this. So I'm just going to copy and paste the line. So we're going to check if the current item is the scanner, and then if it is, we want to actually scan. So unlike base class, instead of doing if get mouse button down, first thing we want to do is check if we're hovering over an item that can be scanned. So we're going to be using pc.currentHoverObject. So in the update, we want to set the current hover item. So how we do this is we check if the current hover object is null. And then if it isn't, then we can set the current hover item to be the current hover object's ItemScriptable object. But if it is, we'll have to set current hover item to null. So the reason we aren't just setting PC current hover object to this all of the time is because if the current hover object, meaning the interactable object script, is null, then we won't be able to get item and will actually return an error. So we have to actually check if it's there or not and then set it after that. So then after we get the current hover item from the current hover object, we need to display the scan percentage. Remember that in the scan info manager, if we put in a null value, it will just turn off the scanner. So this will make sure that the scanner is toggled correctly and also displaying the correct percentage, regardless of whether we're hovering over a scannable item or not. Then the last thing we need to do is to check if the current hover item is actually scannable. And then if it is, we can do and then if it is scannable, then we can finally call scan. Yeah, so we check if the item is scannable, and then we can check for whenever you're holding down the mouse button. Yeah, so as opposed to get mouse button down, which only checks whenever the mouse button is clicked down, get mouse button will return true for every frame that the mouse is being held for. Yeah, so now we can scan the current hover item and return. And with that, we have all of the code that we need for our scanner. So now I'm going to do a quick time lapse to create the scanner item. You're all familiar with how to create tools by now. So now I'll just create it quickly and then cut back to when I'm done. Okay, we finished creating the scanner, so let's test it out now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick it up. Oh, oops. As always, I forgot to set the scanner to be a tool instead of a generic item. Let's try that again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick it up. I'm going to put it in my hotbar, and then we can try to scan things. Right, I forgot to set the variable crosshair of the player. Right, if we go back down to here, we should be able to set the crosshair. Yeah, slipped my mind. And while we're at it, let's just check out the items. So as you can see, they're all scannable. The big fish should take longer to scan than the others because I set the scan rate to 30. So yeah, I'll take this out of my hand. As you can see now, if you see on screen, you can see the scan displayer is active. When I drag away, it's no longer active. When I hover over an item that can be scanned, it is active. And as you can see, it updates properly to change the percentage for each item that scans. So you can see all the items are scanning at the same weight. But if I try to scan this fish here, it takes a lot longer, and that's because we set the big fish to have a scan rate of 30 instead of 10. So yeah, as you can see, it all works. And then if we stop playing and check out the scan percentages, they actually save on the ItemScriptable object itself so that we can change it. So yeah, great. With that, that's actually everything for today's video. We fixed some bugs and created 3 new tools, the Sea Glide, the scanner, and the flashlight. So yeah. Oh, actually, let me show you. If you finish scanning something, it actually will appear on the scan menu. So let's test that bit out too. So yeah, I'm just going to completely scan this plant here. So as you can see now, I can no longer scan it. Here I can still scan these plants. So I'm going to scan 2 plants and then I'm going to open up the scan info menu. So as you can see here, actually these items are all here already, including the ones that we put in at the beginning. But remember when we put it into the ones we put in to test whether the initialize button was working. So now we can click on each of them, and as you can see, it opens up the pop-up correctly and has the picture of the item. And I can press I to close it again, and like when I open it, you can scroll down properly. So yeah, it all works. Anyways, that's everything for today's video. Thanks for watching. See you in the next part, actually. Bye. If you want to support our channel, you can help us by becoming a patron, because this will give you access to project files for all of our tutorials, as well as Patreon exclusive posts on the blog. So any support you give will go a really long way. Right now, we're not making as much money back as we are putting into the content creation. So if you donate, we'll be able to make this a long-term and more sustainable endeavor. See you in the next video.